Well, hello. We're one day away from the election in the United States, presidential election, as everyone knows. And I'm amazed at how enthusiastic people are about this. And when I see, town hall meetings where people are trying to persuade voters on the fence, swing voters, to go with Harris, uh, everyone kind of believes that these politicians are going to do something for them. They're going to deliver something to the working person. Somehow, they're going to do something, health care, or they're going to ensure they keep their jobs in the country. It's clear to me that people don't understand how the global economic system works at all. And and that absurd, crazy event that I mentioned in my last video, Save the Republic, these are just charlatans, performers, performing for their fan base. They have no solutions, no ideas. And if you look at people like Brett Weinstein, look at the published work they've done and compare that to other biologists who are actually doing something besides, spouting bullshit on YouTube. Anyway, fan people of Musk and Weinstein will never be persuaded that the people that they're enamored with are idiots. But anyway, therefore, I think it's really important for people to read Jacques Ellul's book on propaganda. It was written in the 60s. It's extremely prescient and a clear lens through which to view the subject today as ever. So I read the introduction to it. It's short, and I'll put that in this video. But I would recommend you read that book. You have to understand that the smarter you are, the more prone you are to propaganda. We are steeped in it. We are drowning in propaganda 24/7, and we have been from day one, from the minute we went to daycare or preschool or whatever you did. We've been constructed in many ways to think and to view the world in certain ways, and to deconstruct that and critique it oneself and gain a more accurate view of reality requires almost superhuman efforts and good luck. You just have to stumble into the idea that you can do it and then have some feeling like it's a good thing to do, to deconstruct your thoughts, your beliefs, your ideas. And I think that people who study the natural sciences can do this better, especially if they understand what science is and how it works, the scientific method and so on, the community and whatnot. It makes it a little bit easier, but everybody, including the greatest scientists in the world in history, are vulnerable to propaganda and to having their thoughts and ideas manipulated by streams of information that are very deliberately formed and structured and designed to help you feel a certain way and think a certain way. So I'm going to read that and strongly suggest that you dive into that book and read it a couple times. And perhaps this will make you more aware of why you're reacting in certain ways, in certain situations to things. Because this is going to be a dramatic election, I guess, like all the others, the most important one in history. They always say that. And in a few days or so, we'll have some idea what's going to happen on January 6th next year during the inauguration. But 2025, 6, 7, 8, there are going to be business as usual. And we're not going to be really directing our attention or efforts or investing in the things we need to invest in order to get the things that we think we're going to get from our politicians. They're not going to give us anything. They don't run the world. They're run by other players. And it's a resource game. It's an economic game. It's a very sick one, a very dangerous one. I posted at Globe Hackers Facebook some interesting articles about biodiversity loss and overshoot. And these are the things we should be thinking about. Why? Because if we did, I think, and we reconsidered how we do things in our culture, we would have a better life. We'd have better relationships. We'd be healthier in many ways. Now, that's not to say that modern medicine and vaccines and all this are not great and wonderful. And, you know, it is amazing how a combination of factors within medicine and science and risk management and energy has allowed for 8 billion people to live on the earth. But the impact of doing it the way we're doing it is going to destroy our habitat. I can't say that. Every time I make a video, I have to say that until, you know, I mean, I just wish more people believed it and understood what we're facing, but never mind. Who am I to say, right? But there's great information out there, and you can learn how to critique your beliefs and ideas, thoughts and feelings, to understand where they're coming from and why you have them, what the sources are that formed your worldview and so on. And you can eventually take control. And then you'll understand that if you don't have power, there are certain things you can do and certain things you can't do, certain things you have control over and certain things you don't have control over. I don't have control over who wins the election or what happens. You know, if there's a riot in the United States over it or whatever. From a stoical point of view, from Stoicism, you can see, if you think about it in that frame, you can only empower yourself, give yourself agency and the strength and the wisdom to understand what you can and can't do in life with the people around you, in your community and so on. And we have to be very, very clear-headed and clear thinking when we are imagining and deciding what it is we want to do, where we want to focus our attention, where we want to focus our energy, and so on. And of course, you know, for most of us, we just have to focus on making a living. And I understand that. You've got to eat, you got to take care of your family and all that. But I think we have more time than we give ourselves credit for in terms of what we can do to educate ourselves. And education is a two-edged sword, double-edged sword, because, you know, you could think you're getting educated listening to Sam Harris and people like Jordan Peterson, and you could think that this is somehow enlightening you and educating you when you're really not getting anything out of it. And you'd be better off reading some good books. And good books aren't hard to find if you want to find them. And they're not hard to vet if you want to vet them. You can teach yourself all these things, and you can liberate your mind from this nonsense. My mind's constantly being liberated bit by bit by bit. And it will never be totally free, unfortunately. If I had another 100 years in a healthy world, surrounded by healthy people, it would still be a huge challenge to liberate my mind, my thinking. There are answers in Buddhism and other religious practices that can help one to certain degrees liberate one's mind, but the best way to liberate one's mind is to understand reality. And reality is the only word that is meaningless without quotes around it. So that's an important thing to try to understand. So, are we living in a simulacrum, in a simulation? Is everything that we engage in our world a simulation because we're completely swamped by it? We are it. I'm reading another book now about art. I'll talk about that some other time. Anyway, these are questions to think about, and I hope you read this book. Try. Anyway, I think you'll find it extremely interesting and something you can't put down. It's not the easiest book to read, but it's not that difficult either. And you'll find in the introduction that it's good to read these kind of books a couple of times. So sometimes I have the audiobook version and the written book version of things, and I listen to it and read it just to make sure I'm absorbing it. I find it fun to do these things, to read and learn from reading. Not everybody does, I understand that. So be careful what you consume online through videos and whatnot. A lot of YouTubers have an axe to grind, and they spend most of their time grinding their axe rather than really giving you the kind of quality information that you deserve. But there are all kinds of educational platforms out there that you can take advantage of to really learn specifics about thermodynamics, for example, or to become numerate, or to understand political philosophy, the history of political philosophy, and the philosophy of science, things like that, which are all good, I think, and will help you with your critical thinking and will help liberate your mind. So if you want to be free and democratic, you're going to have to get busy and do that work. Okay, I'll read the introduction now. Bulliam T. out. The Introduction to Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitudes by Jacques Ellul. Jacques Ellul's view of propaganda and his approach to the study of propaganda are new. The principal difference between his thought edifice and most other literature on propaganda is that Ellul regards propaganda as a sociological phenomenon rather than as something made by certain people for certain purposes. Propaganda exists and thrives. It is the Siamese twin of our technological society. Only in the technological society can there be anything of the type and order of magnitude of modern propaganda, which is with us forever, and only with the all-pervading effects that flow from propaganda can the technological society hold itself together and further expand. Most people are easy prey for propaganda, Ellul says, because of their firm but entirely erroneous conviction that it is composed only of lies and tall stories, and that, conversely, what is true cannot be propaganda. But modern propaganda has long disdained the ridiculous lies of past and outmoded forms of propaganda. It operates instead with many different kinds of truths: half-truth, limited truth, truth out of context. Even Goebbels always insisted that Wehrmacht communiques be as accurate as possible. A second basic misconception that makes people vulnerable to propaganda is the notion that it serves only to change opinions. That is one of its aims, but a limited, subordinate one. Much more importantly, it aims to intensify existing trends, to sharpen and focus them, and above all, to lead men to action, or, when it is directed at immovable opponents, to non-action through terror or discouragement, to prevent them from interfering. Therefore, Ellul distinguishes various forms of propaganda and calls his book propagandas. That plural is one of the keys to his concept. The most trenchant distinction made by Ellul is between agitation propaganda and integration propaganda. The former leads men from mere resentment to rebellion. The latter aims at making them adjust themselves to desired patterns. The two types rely on entirely different means. Both exist all over the world. Integration propaganda is needed especially for the technological society to flourish, and its technological means, mass media among them, in turn make such integration propaganda possible. A related point, central in Ellul's thesis, is that modern propaganda cannot work without education. He thus reverses the widespread notion that education is the best prophylactic against propaganda. On the contrary, he says, education, or what usually goes by that word in the modern world, is the absolute prerequisite for propaganda. In fact, education is largely identical with what Ellul calls pre-propaganda. The conditioning of minds with vast amounts of incoherent information already dispensed for ulterior purposes and posing as facts and as education. Ellul follows through by designating intellectuals as virtually the most vulnerable of all to modern propaganda for three reasons. One, they absorb the largest amount of secondhand, unverifiable information. Two, they feel a compelling need to have an opinion on every important question of our time, and thus easily succumb to opinions offered to them by propaganda on all such indigestible pieces of information. 3. They consider themselves capable of judging for themselves. They literally need propaganda. In fact, the need for propaganda on the part of the propagandee is one of the most powerful elements of Ellul's thesis. Cast out of the disintegration microgroups of the past, such as family, church, or village, the individual is plunged into mass society and thrown back upon his own inadequate resources, his isolation, his loneliness, his ineffectuality. Propaganda then hands him, in veritable abundance, what he needs, a raison d'être, personal involvement and participation in important events, an outlet and excuse for some of his more doubtful impulses, righteousness, all factitiousness, to be sure, all more or less spurious. But he drinks it all in and asks for more. Without this intense collaboration by the propagandee, the propagandist would be helpless. Thus, propaganda, by first creating pseudo-needs through pre-propaganda and then providing pseudo-satisfactions for them, is pernicious. Can wholesome propaganda be made for a wholesome cause? Can democracy, Christianity, humanism be propagated by modern propaganda techniques? Ellul traces the similarities among all propaganda efforts, communist, Nazi, democratic. He thinks that no one can use this intrinsically undemocratic weapon, or rather, abandon himself to it, unscathed or without undergoing deep transformations in the process. He shows that inevitable, unwilled, propaganda effects of which the good propagandist is unaware, the fallout from any major propaganda activity and all its pernicious consequences. Most pernicious of all, the process, once fully launched, tends to become irreversible. Ellul critically reviews what most American authors have written on the subject of propaganda and mass media. Having studied the literature from Laswell to Reisman with great thoroughness, accepting some of their findings, he rejects others, particularly the efforts to gauge the effects of propaganda. Ellul believes that, on the whole, propaganda is much more effective, and effective in many more ways than most American analysts shows. Particularly, he rejects as unrealistic the meaninglessness all experiments that have been conducted with small groups. Propaganda is a unique phenomenon that results from the totality of forces pressing in upon an individual in his society, and therefore cannot be duplicated in a test tube. To make his many original points, Ellul never relies on statistics or quantification, which he heartlessly disdains, but on observation and logic. His treatise is a fully integrated structure of thought in which every piece fits in with all the others, be they 100 pages apart. In this respect, his work resembles Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Idea, of which the philosopher said that the reader, really, to understand the book, must read it twice, because no page in the book could be fully understood without knowledge of the whole. This procedure can hardly be suggested to the reader in our busy days, but he ought to be warned that to leaf through this book will not suffice. Paul Pickrell, in Harper's Magazine, said of Ellul's The Technological Society that Ellul, a great man, had written with monumental calm and maddening thoroughness a magnificent book. Ellul's propaganda is no less maddening, monumental, and thorough. What, in Ellul's view, can mankind do? At the end of this book, Ellul reaches neither a pessimistic nor an optimistic conclusion with regard to the future. He merely states that, in his view, propaganda is today a greater danger to mankind than any of the other more grandly advertised threats hanging over the human race. His superior analysis ends with a warning, not a prophecy. Conrad Kellen, February 1965.